Chapter 14, Sugar and Sugar Substitutes, presented and narrated by Rihanna Hawkins. Alright, so the book divides this chapter into 5 sections, and I'm just going to follow those 5 sections throughout the chapter just to keep the chapter more organized. So the first topic we're going to talk about is the historical, cultural, and ecological significance of sugar. Sugar has been around for a while and has contributed to a lot of global politics. For example, global exploration, slavery, and capitalism all had sugar to some extent as part of their motive. Also, it's been utilized in ancient civilizations, and today the world consumes approximately 120 million tons annually of sugar, and it's increasing at a rate of 2 million tons a year. 40% of the world's sugar is produced in the European Union, Brazil, and India. Those 3 areas are responsible for 40% of how much sugar is produced annually. So what products are sugar? There's products of the sugar industry, which include raw sugar. It's granulated, solid, or coarse, and is brown in color, and it forms when the moisture from the juice of the sugarcane evaporates. There's granulated sugar, which is more commonly known as table sugar. There's brown sugar, which is made from the sugar crystals from molasses syrup. There's confectioner's sugar, which is a powdered sugar that's finely ground. There's turbinado sugar, which is unrefined sugar made from sugarcane juice. There's fructose, which is naturally occurring sugar in fruit. And then there's honey, which is made by honeybees, and is comprised of sugar, water, and oxygen. Despite all the types of sugar that I just mentioned, the book focuses on 2 main sources of sugar, which is sugarcane and beet sugar. First, I'll talk about sugarcane, it starts as a type of grass that grows in tropical regions. It takes about 6 to 12 months to reach maturity, and the stem is the harvested part of the plant that is then rolled with lots of pressure to extract the juice that's within it. And that juice is then filtered and thickened by heating and evaporation, which yields raw sugar, and then further processing can yield some of the other types of sugar, like white sugar, confectioner's sugar. The second type of sugar that the book mentions is beet sugar. So, as you know, beets are root vegetables, and unlike sugarcane, beets need 4 times the space that sugarcane needs. However, it does grow in a larger range of climates, which is an advantage of using beets for sugar. Beets must be dug up out of the ground, and unlike sugarcane, where the stem is the harvested portion, beets, the roots are the harvested portion, like the beet bulb itself. It will then be cut into thin strips that look like chips, diffused in hot water, and the juice is processed in a similar way to cane sugar. And it is then cleaned, boiled, steamed, and evaporated to reveal the sugar crystals. So now we're going to talk about the physical and chemical properties of sugar. So for physical properties of sugar, you can divide sugars into monosaccharides, disaccharides, oligosaccharides, and polysaccharides. For monosaccharides, there's glucose, fructose, and galactose. And for disaccharides, there's sucrose, lactose, and maltose. And all monosaccharide means is like there's one sugar unit. So it's one carbon ring. If you look at the images below, you can notice that glucose, fructose, and galactose are all one carbon ring in size, and the disaccharides have that bond in the middle, and then it's just two units together. Whether it's glucose and fructose, which makes sucrose, also known as table sugar, glucose and galactose, which makes lactose, or glucose and glucose, which makes maltose. Oligosaccharides are 3 to 10 monosaccharide units. So remember those monosaccharides being glucose, fructose, and galactose. So it would be 3 to 10 of those linked up together to make an oligosaccharide. And then polysaccharides are going to be sugar unit chains that are 10 or more. And common polysaccharides are going to be starch, which is the storage unit for sugar in plants. And then there is glycogen, which is the storage unit of sugar in animals. So when you think of nutrition, remember when we would talk about the liver producing glucagon, which stimulates the creation of glycogen. It's just that that is our storage unit for glucose. So when we have too much excess glucose in our bloodstream, that is how we store it, is as glycogen, which is a polysaccharide. Types of sugars and sweeteners. So, types of sugars and sweeteners. So, a sweetener is also known as a sugar substitute, and they're used quite a bit in food. And there is a rating called GRAS, which is generally recognized as safe. And different sugar substitutes that are introduced into the food market typically want to receive a GRAS rating, or want to be marked as appropriate by GRAS, so that people aren't afraid of adverse effects from consuming sugar substitutes. And there are 3 categories of substitutes that add sweetness. There's caloric sweeteners, which, indicative of the name, they carry calories. There's artificial sweeteners, which typically don't carry any calories and are not naturally occurring. And sugar alcohols, which, as the name suggests, have a hydroxide group attached to the carbon ring. So listed on this slide are all the different caloric or nutritive sweeteners. I think it's interesting to note that on this list, the only two that don't require any processing are honey and maple syrup. Table sugar, we already went over how that's made, and molasses is made from the residual sugarcane juice from table sugar production. Crystalline fructose, corn syrup, and high fructose corn syrup are all made from corn sources and require lots of processing. Trehalose is naturally occurring but does require processing and enzymatic activity in order to extract the sugar substitute. And stevia is an herbal sweetener extracted from a South American shrub of the sunflower family. And it is significantly sweeter than sugar, 250 to 300 times sweeter than sugar. And then there's invert sugar, that once it is processed, it also needs like an acid to activate it, and then it yields equal parts of glucose and fructose, and that allows the sugar to resist crystallization, which is great for bakers and anyone that's cooking with sugar, it yields a nice smooth texture that is really ideal for cooking with. So one of the take-home messages of this chapter is that there are many different forms of sugar. Sugar is naturally occurring in fruit and milk, and I guess it should also say in honey from bees. The book didn't explicitly say that though. But and then sugar is added to foods and products in many forms, whether that's fruit juice concentrates, high fructose corn syrup, honey, invert sugar, malt sugar, molasses, raw sugar. So the thing that's important to note here is just being aware of how many types of sugar that there are, and also knowing how to communicate that to clients and patients. Because on food labels there are so many different names of sugar and sugar substitutes, and it can be very hard to navigate that space. Another helpful trick to know is that if it ends in ose, which is OSE, it is a sugar. So that includes dextrose, fructose, glucose, lactose, maltose, sucrose. So that OSE denotes that you're dealing with a sugar molecule of some sort. The book talks about artificial sweeteners as non-nutritive sweeteners, meaning they don't add any nutrients calorically to the diet. Artificial sweeteners are typically going to be used to control weight and blood glucose levels, as well as to prevent dental caries. So this list is a list of artificial sweeteners on the market currently. They range anywhere from equally as sweet as sugar, so that'll be the polyols or the sugar alcohols, to 8,000 times the sweetness of sugar, which is neotame. There is evidence that shows that artificial sweeteners don't necessarily help with weight loss because they gear the taste buds to desiring a much higher level of sweetness in the diet, which then creates sugar cravings and can lead to seeking out more sugar and sugary substances, whether that's drinks or foods. So just something to note with artificial sweeteners. Even though you're not consuming sugar, you are still creating that feedback loop in the brain that's triggering that desire for sweetness and sugar response. Sugar has many functions in the food that we eat. It tenderizes food for absorbing water, coagulation of egg custards, and it incorporates air in the creaming process, which can make things like fluffier and creamier and lighter. And a continuation of the last slide, sugar is always also great for caramelizing products, and it undergoes the Maillard reaction under heat, which helps with browning. It expedites the growth of yeast, it prevents spoilage, and it crystallizes to allow for a wide variety of candies. What impact does sugar have on health? The impact of sugar on health. Consuming excessive amounts of sugar displaces vital nutrients and fiber in our bodies. So sugar intake is definitely something to be aware of. The dietary reference intake suggests that sugar should account for no more than 25% of the daily total calories, which is 30 teaspoons, equivalent to 120 grams. However, this is not just added sugar that this DRI is talking about. It's all sugar consumption. So that's what you get from fruits and what you get from milk, and then what you get from your beverages and whatever added sugar you get from your foods and desserts and things. So That's actually a little bit harder for people to grasp their minds around when you take into account like naturally occurring sugar. Um, the World Health Organization, however, suggests that sugar should account for no more than 10% of your daily total needs, which is 12 teaspoons, which is equivalent to 48 grams of sugar. And just as a side note, if you're looking for a really great documentary on sugar and like the history and the politics of sugar, Sugar Coated is a documentary that was made in 2015. And it's just a great resource for understanding how deep this sugar debate goes. Sugar has been debated since the late 1960s, and research that was done in the 70s is still relevant and being done today. So definitely worth a read, or not a read, a watch if you have the time. So I did jump the gun a little bit on this slide. I did talk about it a little bit on the artificial sweetener slide. But anyway, the relationship between sweeteners and artificial sweeteners to weight gain may be linked in satiety, which basically is your feelings of satisfaction with your food, or like you feel like you've eaten enough. If you get your taste buds adjusted and acclimated to all of that sweetness and all that sugary food, it's going to increase your sugar cravings and your sugar dependence. So it's going to make it harder to feel satiated from eating sweet food. You're always going to be constantly wanting more. And something to be cognizant of is that sugar substitutes are dramatically sweeter than sugar. So when you're dealing with sugars that are 200 and 300 and 400 times sweeter than table sugar, you're putting yourself in a tough situation to become more dependent on sugar. And if you go to page 438 and 439 in the book, they really get into just how much sweeter than sugar certain sweeteners are. How can sugar help the planet become more green? Sugar in corn, sugar beets, sugar cane, and other plants are used to make plastics, including biodegradable plastics, also known as PLAs. PLAs biodegrade after its life cycle in 190 to 120 days. Bagasse, which is the pulp byproduct of sugarcane refining, is being used also to make paper products, and those products biodegrade in 180 days. And the really cool thing about this is conventional plastics take 1,000 years to biodegrade, and tree-based paper products destroy rainforests and forests and are just not the most sustainable and green.